Hey, horror fans, Pete here from the Cast, and I have a very special interview for you guys today. I am interviewing legendary director Tom Holland, who co wrote the screenplay for Psycho 2. He co wrote and directed the first Child's Play. He wrote and directed Fright Night. This guy has done so much. I don't need to introduce him. Tom, thank you so much for being on the Cast.
Pete, thank you for having me.
Yes, we are here today because Tom has a book that has come out just recently, Fright Night Origins, and it was put out by Encyclopocalypse uh, Publications. And Tom, I got to admit something right off the bat. I had not seen Fright Night until I read your book.
Really?
Yes, sir. I know I'm on a horror channel, but I had not seen Fright Night. I always heard about it. And then I actually read your book before I watched the movie.
Wow.
Yeah. So the other host that we have on this channel, Danny, he couldn't make it for last minute reasons, but he wanted me to tell you that he has a club after school where he shows horror movies to students, high school students, and his most recent movie he showed them was Child's Play.
Mm-hmm. Child's Play will scare you a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Fright Night is more of a multi-generational film.
Right.
Grandparents, now at this point, it was an R1, I think, when it came out, but at this point, grandparents share it with their grandchildren.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't do that with Child's Play.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that was one of Danny's questions that he wanted me to pass on to you, which was, how does it feel just to have this catalog of movies that you've made that people can go back to for generations and check out and show their kids, show their grandkids?
Pete, I'm still trying to figure out what I feel about it. I'm forever grateful, and I'm totally shocked because when I was shooting these films, it never occurred. Films were disposable. You know, they were there for that year, and maybe you'd have an enormous success, and maybe it would last in memory for 3 or 4 or 5 years. But films at that time, in the 70s and 80s, films didn't have the shelf life that they now have.
Mm-hmm.
No, it never occurred to me. I pinched that this would happen. I pinched myself all the time. I had a guy who's become a friend now called Rob Galuzzo show up at my door about 17, 18 years ago, doing a documentary about Psycho 2.
Okay.
And that was the first glimmer that I had of what was happening in terms of a new set of classics coming along, I guess you'd say, or for a new generation.
Yeah.
But it didn't really sink in on me until about, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I went to Texas Frightmare.
Oh, okay.
And the line was down and around the block, and I could not believe it. I couldn't believe it. So what I think is happening is that because I came out and I went to, my line is I'll go to any convention if I can drive. You know,
okay.
but if I have to get into a plane, forget it.
Right.
I went to something called Son of Monster Palooza here in LA last weekend or the weekend before.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one person coming up after another telling me that their parents or their grandparents are showing them Fright Night.
Yeah.
And so that's gotten embedded in a family culture. That's different than Child's Play. I was a little horrified at how young some of the people were when they first saw it. I had one girl tell me she'd seen it when she was 5 years old.
Oh man.
And I can't, I mean, I that's, a little early for me, but I mean, I figured 12, 13 was an okay age, because with Child's Play, you're telling kids that, hey, your toys can come alive and they can do not nice things to you. So
Right. Yeah. I
it,
oh,
I
go ahead. I'm
think
sorry.
I think what's going on, Pete, and I think that your podcast is an example. Is I think that horror is the fan base is exploding, and it's becoming its own community.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's something going on in the culture where that genre is exploding.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you get to remember when I came in and I started doing horror, it was disreputable.
Right.
So
Yeah.
amazed. I'm amazed.
Well, Chris Sarandon is in both Child's Play and he's also in Fright Night. He plays Jerry Dandridge. I was going to say that, obviously you guys must have had some kind of working relationship and, you liked working with him to have him on your other film. Did you always kind of have him in mind to play Jerry Dandridge, or was there another idea for that vampire?
No, I did not have any idea, but I know that I needed a real actor. I needed an actor for Fright Night in every part.
Yeah.
The and I I needed a name, and a respectable, a highly thought of name, to take the onus of horror off of it, off of
Mhm.
Fright Night. Okay.
Sure.
And this is in the back of my head. I'm back in 1984, 85.
Yeah.
And I thought Chris was a brilliant actor. I mean, with Dog Day Afternoon, he got an Academy Award nomination, I think.
Yeah.
So he said that he had no interest in reading the script because it was genre. And somebody uh, told him how good the script was and what an acting piece. And he read it, and he told me after 5 or 6 pages he was hooked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Roddy coming in as Peter Vincent also calmed. It became more of, and it was an extraordinary experience in terms of production and making it, because I had a full 2 weeks of rehearsals,
Mm.
which is unheard of, because usually you have to pay the actors for the rehearsal time, and God
Right.
forbid the studio should have to spend any more money, and they won't do it. So
Yeah.
normally you end up, depending on the goodwill of the actors. But in this case, in the Fright Night case, everybody had theater experience,
Oh, okay.
and they were excited to rehearse. And before I was through, I had Fright. I took and I taped out every set on the stage floor,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a big director come in with me, Colin Higgins,
Mm-hmm.
to watch it, and I ran it like a play,
Sure.
moving moving from beginning to end through the set, and it
Sure.
played. It just played,
Yeah.
but the actors, before I started to shoot, the actors knew their blocking. They had dug out a lot of the moments.
Mm-hmm.
Goodness knows we certainly explored character and character arc.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and everybody came to work and came to make the best film. And
Yeah.
you had Roddy sort of leading it as the eminent Greek, however you pronounce that, Greece or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then you had Chris coming along, nipping at Roddy's heels in terms of performance. So it was just a fabulous experience. Really
Yeah.
was.
I think in terms of, because you were saying it was like a play, I think that the scene that really got me into the movie, and it's very early on, is when Jerry attacks Charlie in his room. And I feel like that's a very intense scene. And I think that's when we first see the visual effects really come into play, the vampire visual effects. Do you feel like because of that scene and then what follows in the rest of the movie, that you sort of kind of rejuvenated vampire films at that point, sort of like
Well,
leading to like the Lost Boys and like Near Dark?
yes, I mean, at that moment in time, vampires were dead, dead, dead in more ways than one, because you had the disaster of the play, Dracula, which I think was a musical.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was a musical, and that was a huge film. I think Robert Wise maybe directed it, and it
Hmm.
was an enormous failure. And then you had a spoof, a farce called Love at First Bite
Oh,
with
yeah.
George Hamilton.
Right.
And if you watch genre, usually spoof is indicates the exhaustion of a genre. It's become so familiar that nobody can do anything with it except poke fun at it.
Right.
That's sort of where vampires were when I came up with Fright Night.
Hmm.
And the Columbia had a slot with nothing in there for a very low budget movie that they thought they were throwing away. And I was a hot writer, and the script, I guess, was pretty good. And so they gave me a shot. Yeah, you have to remember, Psycho 2 was an enormous commercial success.
Right.
It's forgotten now, but it was the second biggest movie in the summer of 1982.
Oh
After,
whoa.
yeah, after the first Star Wars sequel. You can
Hmm.
believe that. That's how big Psycho 2 was. Well, it was Tony Perkins coming back to play Norman Bates.
Hmm.
And who didn't want to see that?
Right.
You know, and besides, it was a good movie and great performances. And oh my goodness, that made me a very, very hot writer.
Hmm.
And I wanted to direct, but I was also happy as a writer. But the film that I'd written just before that was called Scream for Help,
Okay.
and it did not work as a film.
Mm.
It just didn't work. And I thought to myself, well, I know every beat in Fright Night. I know every visual. And I don't want Scream for Help to happen to me again.
Yeah.
It was directed by a very, very charming fellow called Michael Winner.
Okay.
And he'd done the Charles Bronson, the vigilante movies.
Oh,
And
okay.
he was terribly, terribly charming, but he didn't like dialogue very much. So what
Oh.
he did was he went through my script and he cut as much dialogue as he could.
Oh,
And
okay.
so when he did that, you didn't know what was going on with the people or what the emotional arcs of the actors were. And the action may have made sense, but what was going on with the characters and their relationships was, I don't understand this. So I thought, well, I'm gonna do better than that. So I held on, and I got offers to buy the script, but without me directing. And I kept on turning them down. And then finally, Guy McElwain at Columbia gave me a shot at directing,
Oh, awesome.
and that was Fright Night. I mean, so I don't know what to say, Pete. You just keep working. You
Yeah.
know, and sometimes it turns out, and sometimes it doesn't, but you just keep trying to get up at bat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you continue to work, and now you've put out this Fright Night Origins book. And I
yeah,
was wondering because I saw in an interview that you had done, it was on YouTube. You mentioned how you had the Fright Night story in your head for at least a year before you wrote the screenplay. And I know that was when Roddy McDowall came on. That sort of, or not right. I'm sorry. When he came up with the idea of Peter Vincent, that's when things started to click. And
yes,
I was wondering, in that year when you just had Fright Night in your mind, is that where you came up with a lot of these details for the backstory for Jerry Dandridge and Charlie's life?
yes. I mean, what I can't. Fright Night was a wonderful idea, and I had it. And I thought it was a deliciously. I I thought it was just. It's what I would have wanted to happen to me when I
Right,
was 14 or 15.
right,
Well, maybe 16, 17 would be better. But I
right.
mean, it was that would have been wonderful to have had that happen when I was a teenager. And so
Hmm.
I had written a movie called Cloak and Dagger, if you
Hmm.
ever saw that. And
Hmm.
that was based on The Window, which was the juvenile version of Rear Window, written by Cornell Woolrich,
Okay.
who was a great writer of the 30s and the 40s and 50s, I think.
Hmm.
Uh, you look up his bibliography. I mean, it's just amazing. Almost everything he wrote was turned into a movie. He was the Stephen King of the 40s. He dealt with psychological suspense, Cornell Woolworth. So he'd written this children's story, and they made it into a movie called The Window in 1948 or 9.
Okay.
And Universal wanted to remake it, but there was nothing there. It was literally a boy who cried wolf story. It was urban, suburban, whatever that movie came out. It was the same thing.
Oh, Suburbia.
In the house next door,
Yeah.
and it's a boy involved. But
Yeah.
it wasn't enough for me. So I wrote an original screenplay for Cloak and Dagger. But before I told Universal and the director, Richard Franklin, that if you really wanted to do a boy seeing something happening in the house next door,
Right.
that would freak him out and really start a series of events, have the kid be a mad horror fan, teenager,
Right.
and have a vampire next door chomping down on somebody. And Universal threw me out of the office. Okay.
Okay.
And everybody thought I was nuts. And so after I'd done Cloak and Dagger, I still couldn't get the idea out of my head. And I kept saying to myself, well, if that happened to me, what would I do? Because nobody's going to believe you. And that's when I used to watch the Friday night frights on TV. And
Sure.
it was a local channel. It was like 11 o'clock on Friday night. You could find some pretty terrible horror movie, okay, on TV. And the good stuff was really Hammer and AIP.
Sure.
And so I was writing about that opening scene where he's watching the movie and the vampiress is seducing that's Hammer.
Right. Right.
But I thought to myself, when I watched the Friday night frights, there was always a host, and they were from Poverty Row. They never had any money, but they were great fun. The Stagger Lee, Vampira, I don't know. You've got them now, sort of carrying on the tradition. But then they were really a big deal. This is the very beginning of horror fandom.
Sure.
This is EC Comics after they've been banned, and you had to share them in high school with a few other kids, all boys who were into horror. And it was this very, very small group, and considered to be the uncool group,
Right.
But I grew up on banned versions of EC Comics and the horror films of the 40s and 50s, and I was writing about my youth as a horror fan and how I became so thrilled with horror, and that turned into, when I thought of Peter Vincent, I couldn't wait to get home and write.
Right.
With Peter Vincent, I had a story. I also had delicious comedy. Fright Night's an unusual script. The hero's journey is given to Peter Vincent. He's one who's a coward and is filled with self-doubts and runs away until he can't live with himself and runs back.
Right.
But Charlie is the motor that keeps it going. Charlie really is a terrific human being, young man, but he is so determined to save his friends and his mother from Jerry Dandridge that he keeps driving the story.
Right.
But the one who has the real emotional transition is Peter Vincent.
Yeah. I can see that. I haven't seen that many Hammer horror films, but I could tell right away that that's sort of like where you were getting some inspiration. And then you mentioned those EC comics too when you were growing up. I was wondering. I know that like Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire had come out in the 70s by this point, and there's this one line that Jerry has in the Fright Night film. He says, "Of course, I could give you something I don't have, a choice." And it kind of reminds me of this one line that is in Interview with the Vampire. Was there any kind of influence from that or other vampire stories too?
I you know I no I did not remember that it was similar to Interview, which I'd read, I guess, in the 70s. I know that I asked Alan Davio originally to be the cinematographer, and Alan, who shot Steven Spielberg's short, I guess at USC, turned me down because he was a relative of Anne Rice, and he was afraid of making Anne mad at me. And I've got another story. I had directed Fright Night, and Richard Franklin was the first director on Lost Boys.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Sure. And what happened was Dick, great director, he passed about a year ago. Big director at Warner Brothers. He did all the buddy cop films. Dick. Anyway, he was going to direct it, but he saw Fright Night and he dropped out. And then he hired Richard, or was talking to Richard, and they got in a disagreement over creative things, and I forget what it was. And then Joel Schumacher, I'd known since I was like 17 or 18, ended up directing it.
Oh, wow.
And that probably is the beginning of the resuscitation of the vampire genre. But as far as I know, excluding Abbott and Costello and the monsters, Universal monsters, I think that Fright Night almost created the humor in the vampire genre. Because What I did was I wasn't winking at the audience. I kept the humor within the reality of the situation, of the characters. So the characters the situations were humorous, chuckle humorous, let's say. They weren't Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and Dracula, and whoever else all together.
Right.
And I think that sort of, I think Fright Night really sort of opened up the door to comedy and horror, to laughs in comedy. I did the same thing in Child's Play.
Right.
I mean, it seems rather obvious now, but if you're doing suspense, and pretty much everything I've done has elements or is dominated by suspense.
Right.
It's good to give the audience a chance to laugh, to break suspense, especially after a scare. And then you go back and you start to screw it up again, scare the hell out of them and they'll laugh.
Right.
I think the biggest scare in Child's Play is when Chucky comes alive in her arms, when she's threatening to throw him in the fireplace.
Right.
And that may have been the biggest scream. The other one was the knife coming up in the car between Chris Sarandon's legs.
Right.
Every man in the audience rose out of his seat.
Yeah. It's funny that you brought that up too, because I think you were just recently on Shudder's 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments, right? They interviewed you for that, right?
Yes, they did, and I don't remember. Help me out, Pete.
So I know that you were interviewed by David Weiner.
The moment the doll comes alive?
Yes. That's when, yeah.
Okay. That was a huge scream.
Yeah.
Right? I think the knife coming up in the seat between Chris's legs was almost as big a scream.
Right. Because for that 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments, I knew that Child's Play was going to be on there, and they put it on there. And then, David Weiner, we've had him on our show a couple of times before. He's the guy that is the director of In Search of Darkness. And I know that he's interviewed you for that documentary too. And what I was going to say was, in the most recent In Search of Darkness, they talk about Siskel and Ebert a little bit, right? And what I noticed was that Siskel and Ebert would usually say negative things about horror movies in the 80s and 90s, whereas it looks like Ebert, at least, was very favorable of Fright Night and Child's Play. Do you think there's a reason why Ebert liked your work in particular?
No, I never met him, but I'm very, very thankful that he did. Thank you, Roger. The-
Yeah.
I think because I had an original voice at the time. There was nothing out like Fright Night. There was nothing that enjoyed the humor of the situation and yet stayed within the reality and did not pierce the third wall. So the viewer, the audience could stay in the movie and in the situation and enjoy Charlie's discomfort as well as rooting for him at the same time.
Yeah.
I had laughs in Child's Play, including some huge ones, but that movie's scary.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I did that was because I knew that there was a universal theme in there, which is that all of us as children, at least I did, we all thought at one time or another, looking around our room after the lights had been turned out, and you'd see the shadows of the silhouettes of your toys, you thought to yourself, what would happen if my toys or one of my toys came alive?
Right. Right.
And that's what attracted me to Child's Play.
Yeah. Well, with Child's Play, Danny and I have been reviewing that 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments show, and we both thought that Child's Play should have been higher on the list than where they put it. Like, because Chucky, he's just one of the iconic slashers, of all time. So,
Well, that's amazing too. The
yeah.
tip of the hat to Dan Mancini.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because Child's Play has nothing to do with any of Child's Play 1 has nothing to do with the Child's Play or the Chuckies or any of them. It's totally different sensibility. But if it wasn't for all those Chucky movies and the TV series, I don't think that Child's Play would be remembered as fondly and as enormously as it is. And
Mhm.
yes, you're right. Chucky has joined along with Michael Myers and Freddy and Ghostface. Yeah, he's one of the maybe what are there 4 or 5 of them? They're
Yeah.
iconic horror characters. Yes, and Chucky certainly has that. However, I will tell you that if you look at Child's Play, at the end in the climax of the movie, I burned him. I shot his head off.
Right.
I shot an arm off. I shot half a leg off. And then I threw him up against the wall and I shot him in the heart. I shot Chucky in the heart. I showed you the blood splattering on the wall behind it, and you saw the doll die.
Mm-hmm.
And the preview cards came back. Hell of a setup for a sequel. I mean, nobody believed that I was trying to make sure there wasn't a sequel.
Yeah.
And indeed, there's been nothing else but.
So, right. He's still going. He has a TV show right now. Yeah.
Yeah, funny.
So I know that you worked with Brad Fiedel when you did the score for Fright Night, and I think that the music in Fright Night is great. And then he went on to do Near Dark, and he also did the music for Terminator and Terminator 2. Just a great composer.
He did Terminator before Fright Night.
Right.
Because that was the dawn of electronic music. That started with the remake by the Exorcist director of the movie about transporting nitroglycerin across the road. I forget what it was called. Now that was the second big electronic music, and then I think Terminator followed. That was the first, and Terminator followed that. And I was blown out by Terminator, and I got together with Brad, and I just loved what he did. And then I had a brilliant music supervisor named David Shackler, who was still with us. And David put together all those songs, all the sort of the needle drops or whatever you want to call. There weren't needle drops in the movie, but they were written for the scenes. He had the script, and he'd come on the set and he'd see some of the shooting. and he got people to write songs and to sing them that would complement the movie.
Yeah.
And I think that along with a brilliant underscore by the composer, I think it makes it's an extraordinarily popular soundtrack.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. In particular, I really love the music in that club sequence. I think that's really great. Just like the persona of Jerry Dandridge it's so imposing, and then he's also seductive too. I think he's this great character. And when I read Fright Night Origins, it was kind of interesting because there's so much detail about him in that book, and there's so much detail about Charlie. Um, what I was going to ask you was, you go into his actual origin in the Fright Night Origins book. Did you have to do any research into? I
Yeah.
don't want to spoil the book for people who haven't read it, but there is that sort of that kind of Dracula time period, that older
Yes.
time period.
I
Did you
did
do
the
any research into
research.
that? Oh,
I
go
did
ahead.
the research along with my co-writer, Jack Ulrich, and
Yeah,
all of that is true. And what you have in Friday Night Origins is I could put in missing scenes, and I could put in the backstory of the various characters so you would understand them better. You
yeah,
would understand why Charlie is so driven to do the right thing, and what family circumstances led to that. And it also sets up what will be the character arc in the coming series. The response from the fans has been so positive that Jack and I are going to continue to write, and I'm hoping to write a series of books. And I bet it takes me 7, 8 books to arc it the way I want to do it. I don't know if I should say this now. The well, I'm already working on Aftermath, which is the sequel to Fright Night Origins, and I hope to have it out in January.
whoa,
And then we're going to find out what happens to everybody in the movie because they're all going to come back.
nice.
And we're going to find out about their characters and their relationships and why they are the way they are and how they changed during this experience. And I'm looking forward to it. I mean,
Yeah,
an extraordinary, to me, extraordinary thing has happened. We only published 4.5, 5 weeks ago,
yeah,
and the book has gotten an extraordinarily positive reaction from fans and from other people who've read it, and
yeah,
it's selling. It's still selling.
yeah.
So I mean, I think that's wonderful, and it puts an obligation on me to continue the story. Plus, I'm as curious as you are to find out what happens.
Heck yeah.
Well, that's the reason you're a writer. You tell a story. You want to find out what happens.
Right.
You don't know any better than the reader. You know.
Right. I like I said, I read the book before I watched the movie, and it's so interesting because like it opens up this other chapter in it, and introduces new characters too that aren't even in the story, and it just sounds like you got this big mythology going on. And
Yes.
is the
I want,
mythology?
I want to create a universe or a world. I
Yeah,
want to create the Fright Night world.
yeah,
And I brought in new characters because look, Amy's in love with Jerry. Amy is never going to break that bond with Jerry because when Jerry bit her, not only did he drink her blood, she drank his.
right.
And so Charlie's never going to be able to fight through that. So I had to, I sort of set up a love interest for the following books for Charlie.
That's cool. Yeah, yeah. What's it like working with your co-writer too on this novel?
Jack and I have been working together for 12 years.
Oh, whoa, okay,
Yeah, it's a whole long story. The
sure.
but anyway, we're very comfortable with each other, and he's a very good writer.
Yeah,
And I don't know how much I should say, but I mean, there's every when I first came to this town, every actor, every waiter and waitress was an aspiring actor.
right.
Then sometime in the 80s, every waiter and waitress started carrying a script around under their arm. They serve you your coffee and hey, by the way, read this.
Right,
You
right.
know, That was the 80s and 90s.
Right.
And now I look around and everybody's a hyphenate. You know, you can't find anybody who's just an actor.
Oh.
They're actors, they're writers, they're producers, they're directors, you know.
Right.
So I said to Jack, let's do something that people aren't doing. Let's write novels.
Sure.
And because Fright Night was a spec script on my part, not a work for hire.
Right.
I held when I made the movie deal on it, I withheld all literary, dramatic, and play dramatic rights, which are plays and musicals. And
Oh,
I
okay.
can't remember what else I withheld. But anyway, so I own all the literary rights.
Oh, nice.
So I don't have to, you know, I can do this. So I'm lucky enough that I've been able to go in and write a novel and hopefully a series of novels that deals with a movie that's very, very famous. It's not
Mm-hmm.
as famous as Chucky. I have this terrible feeling that Child's Play will probably be the first thing on my tombstone. But right beneath it will be Fright Night. And hopefully after that, Cloak and Dagger, not Cloak and Dagger, Psycho 2. But I like Cloak and Dagger too.
Right.
And I
Right.
like the Stephen King movies too. So anyway.
Oh, yeah. I was a big fan of the Langoliers when I was a kid.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Because that, number one, I think it's a brilliant piece of work by Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is. That's a sort of a long novella. I forget what the word count is. And it was a 4-hour miniseries.
Right.
And the cast I thought was brilliant, and it was an ensemble cast, and they were all terrific. And then what happened? This is just at the moment when CGI, this is like 93, I think,
Right.
when CGI is starting to come in. And so you have this very primitive, rudimentary CGI at the very end for the climax, and it's god awful. And I think for years it ruined the television, the miniseries, the movie.
Yeah.
But as a piece of drama, it still works.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
Stephen gave me permission just recently to publish the teleplay of Langoliers and the screenplay of Thinner. So
Oh,
I'm putting both of those out for the fans that want to read it. Probably people who are interested in adaptations,
yeah.
you know, novel adaptations.
Yeah.
But I mean, I thank you very much for saying that about Langoliers. I really appreciate that
Oh, yeah.
because that was a true bitch to make.
Oh, really?
We did that at the Camden International Airport during the height of the summer season,
Mm-hmm.
but an airport that's supposed to be totally abandoned.
Right.
And so I'm shooting these scenes with the actors where we're all trying to pretend that nobody's there, and thousands of people are flooding off the planes to go have their summer vacation at the main coast.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
I think Bronson Pinchot turned in a very good performance.
Bronson is an underrated actor, and
Yeah.
I don't know what's happened to him. Because I saw him on a reality show, and
Oh,
he was always a mad collector. He's borderline brilliant. He knew art. I mean, his love was paintings and sculpture and furniture.
right.
I mean, those are very odd passions for most actors that I've met.
Right.
But you know that, and he's he's a very brave character actor. He
Mm-hmm.
starts to go, and you sort of grab hold of his feet and hang on for dear life. I think Bronson's wonderful.
Yeah. No, I always remember that miniseries because I mean, at that time there were so many Stephen King miniseries on ABC. You know, The Stand and It, and I like the Langoliers a lot. I mean, just the heroic end of the main character. You know, and he's flying the plane. I mean, spoiler for this movie from the '90s, but that always just kind of stood out to me. And then when Bronson has that turn towards the end and he becomes violent, oh, that was scary. Just the concept of itself, like being outside of time, I thought that was really intriguing, and so I
That's
think he did a fantastic job.
that's Stephen. You know, Stephen King is look horror is becoming its own community now.
Yeah,
But the one who opened it up for the middle class in America, I think, was Stephen. before Stephen, horror was considered something that you did in the back bedroom, or you locked the closet, locked the bathroom behind you. You know,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
but Stephen's use of brand names, one of the things he did, he made it very, very accessible
Hmm.
to the wider reading public.
Yeah.
And for that, all horror aficionados owe Stephen King a big thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Well, I personally want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I'm super excited about reading more Fright Night books written by you and Jack. I was going to say that Encyclopocalypse, I know that they also do some really great audiobooks. Is there any talk of adapting Fright Night Origins into an audiobook?
At this moment, right now, starting today is Saturday.
Yes.
I can tell you what the date is here on my machines. October 29th. Ha ha!
Yes.
Pumpkin Day is on the way.
We're almost
The
there.
On Tuesday, Chris Sarandon is beginning to record a reading of Fright Night Origins.
Perfect. That is perfect.
And I made a terrible mistake. I put Latin spells in
Oh.
towards the end of Fright Night Origins. And I got a panicked email this morning from Chris saying, I never took Latin in high school. How do I pronounce this?
Right.
So, oh my God. I looked it up online, but I don't have a clue how to pronounce it either. So I don't know what I'm going to do about that one. Anyway, Chris is going to read Fright Night Origins, and I'm hoping we have it ready to get it out for Christmas.
Oh, fantastic. I already read the book, but I will definitely get the audiobook just so I can hear him. And
I've,
I'm usually good.
well, I've also got, before Christmas, I'm coming out with something called Child's Play, a visual memoir,
Oh,
which
okay.
I have hundreds, if not thousands, of production stills taken on location in Chicago and also back here where I was working with the doll. And if you really want to get a sense of how difficult Child's Play was to make work, at the time there was no other doll movie that even approached the complexity of what I'd written in that script. And you can really see it in a visual memoir. It's 150 picture photos of the production of Child's Play, over 100 of which have never been seen before easily. So that
Wow.
I'm also coming out with that.
That is fantastic. Wow. Okay. So you got this Child's Play visual dictionary, you have the audio book of Fright Night Origins, and you have Fright Night Origins. All essentially, Fright Night Origins already out. These things are coming out soon. Great gifts for horror fans for Christmas time. Fingers crossed. Nice.
Yes, thank
Tom,
you.
I just want to say thank you so much. Like, I think you're the biggest guest that we've had on this show so far, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with me. If you ever want to come back on the show, we'd be more than happy to have you on again.
I'll tell you what, put me down and do it after the new year. And
You got
you call me again and we'll see what progress we both have made. And
sounds
I want to thank all your fans out here who are listening to Pete. You're in the show. I mean, it's people like Pete and his partner that are helping to grow the genre and knit the community together. I mean, what's going on now? I'm probably over. But what's going on is that movies like you look at a Marvel movie, it's $100 million to make the damn thing, and then it's another 100 million to market it.
right,
So and you're writing within extremely tight confines. Okay,
right,
the bigger the budget, the more homogenized it is, the less, in a lot of ways, the less interesting it is because of the financial concerns. Horror doesn't have that.
no,
So horror, because it's comparatively so cheap to make, is the one genre that really most immediately tells you what's going on with the culture. You'll see
yeah,
the cultural concerns, the cultural worries, and also what's happy there. You also see what's good about things there too. But right now, horror, that was always the redheaded stepchild, is now the most vibrant genre in movies and streaming and whatever else you've gotten, wherever else it's going to go. We talk after the new year. I'm sure it'll be totally. We'll have already sensed the change in it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's huge change going on. The one constant is horror, and people like to be scared. They like to laugh and be scared, and they also like to see themselves and what's happening to the world as interpreted through the genre.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, this has been a great year for horror. There's been some really incredible releases. We've definitely covered some of them on our channel. But I got to say that, like, we wouldn't be at this point without some of the movies that you've contributed to the genre. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank
And,
you.
yeah, and we will gladly have you back on in the new year.
God bless everybody.
Thank you.
Bye bye.